Commander Isla Chen stood at the observation window of Way Station, Jericho, and stared into the endless dark beyond the reinforced glass panels that separated her from the void of space. Station hummed with its usual rhythm of life support systems and distant conversations echoing through metal corridors, but Isla heard none of it because her mind was focused on something else. Entirely 60 years had passed since Earth went silent, 60 years since humanity's homeworld sent its final transmission, and then disappeared from the network of colonies that spread across dozens of star systems like seeds scattered by a cosmic wind nobody talked about Earth anymore, because talking about it meant remembering the fear that came with those final words transmitted across the darkness of space in every human language known to the species. "Do not respond," the message had said in voices that trembled with something between terror and resignation. "Do not call," and then the most haunting part. Forget us. After that transmission ended, there was only silence from the blue planet that had given birth to billions of souls, who now lived scattered among the stars and moons of distant systems. The silence protocol emerged not from any government decree or military command, but from the collective decision of every colony and station and ship in. What people now called the Terran Spirit was simple and absolute in its directive, which every child learned before they could read star charts, or operate an airlock: never transmit toward Earth, and never aim a receiver in that direction, and never speak of returning because something had taken humanity's birthplace, and drawing its attention could doom everyone who remained alive in the UHS. Darkness between Starzila turned away from the window as the door to the observation deck slid open with a soft hiss of pressurized AIRDR. Marcus Webb entered, carrying a data tablet clutched against his chest, like it contained the secrets of the universe itself. Webb was the station's xenolinguist and historian, though Jericho had never encountered alien life in its 20 years of operation, which meant Webb spent most of his time studying humanity's own past instead of translating messages from creatures that might not even exist. "Commander," Webb said, and his voice carried that particular tone he used when he had discovered something he thought was important. "We received an automated signal approximately 40 minutes ago." Isla felt her stomach tighten, because automated signals from the deep dark were rarely good news and often meant someone was dying or already dead in the cold.
Guess.
"Embrace of space, show me," she said, and gestured toward the central display console that dominated one wall of the observation deck. Webb activated the tablet, and the wall display came alive with cascading streams of data that meant nothing to Isla until Webb filtered it down to something a station commander could understand without 3 degrees in communications theory. "It's a distress beacon," Webb explained as his fingers moved across the tablet's surface with practiced ease. From the colony ship Persephone, the name hit Isla like a physical blow, because everyone who knew their history recognized that particular ship. The Persephone had launched during the chaos after Earth's silence, when millions of terrified humans fled outward into space, hoping the distance would save them from whatever fate had consumed their homeworld. The ship carried 50,000 souls bound for a distant system, but it never arrived at its destination, and search parties found nothing but empty space where the Persephone should have been. "That was 58 years ago. That's impossible," Isla said, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew that impossible meant very little when dealing with the universe's capacity for strange occurrences. "The beacon is authentic," Webb insisted, and pulled up authentication codes that matched records from before the silence. "But, Commander, there's more, and you need to see it." He isolated a specific section of the transmission, and suddenly the observation deck filled with a voice that spoke in Mandarin, then switched to English, then Spanish, then a dozen other languages in rapid succession. "They're gone." The voice repeated over and over in every tongue humanity had carried to the stars. "It's safe." And then the words that made Isla's blood run cold: "Come home." The message looped endlessly, like a prayer or a warning, or perhaps both at once. "Someone sent this from the Persephone," Webb said quietly, "and the ship's last known trajectory would have taken it back toward the Sol system." Isla stared at the data streams and felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. If the Persephone had gone back to Earth, then someone aboard that ship had seen what happened to humanity's birthplace. Someone had survived long enough to send this beacon outward with an impossible invitation to return to a world that everyone had agreed must remain forgotten. call the senior staff," Isla said, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "And Webb, not a word of this to anyone else until we decide what it means." Webb nodded and left the observation deck, while Isla remained standing before the display, watching the message loop through its endless cycle of translations. She thought about the 400 million people living in the Terran sphere and the balance of survival they had maintained for 2 generations. She thought about the children born on distant worlds who had never seen Earth and never would, because the Silence Protocol protected them from whatever lurked in humanity's past. She thought about what it meant that someone was calling them home after 60 years of silence, aside the observation window stars, burned with cold light across distances that would take lifetimes to cross, even with humanity's fastest ships. Somewhere among those stars, in a direction nobody looked anymore, was a yellow sun with a blue planet orbiting at just the right distance for liquid water and complex life. Earth waited in the darkness, and now someone or something was asking humanity to come back. Isla pressed her palm against the cold glass and wondered if pressing that distress beacon's return signal would be the bravest or most foolish thing anyone in the Terran sphere had done since the silence began. The station hummed around her with the sounds of life continuing in its predictable patterns, but Isla Chen knew with absolute certainty that nothing would be predictable anymore, because the one rule that had kept humanity alive for 60 years had just been challenged by a ghost ship. Returning from the grave, the question was whether they would be brave enough or foolish enough to answer. The senior staff gathered in Jericho's command center within the hour, and their faces reflected the same mixture of fear and curiosity that Isla felt churning in her own chest. Chief Engineer Kato Okonkwo arrived first, because he always did, and took his seat at the curved conference table with the practiced efficiency of someone who wasted no motion in his life. Dr. Webb came next, still clutching his data tablet like a sacred text, and his eyes gleamed with the fervor of someone who had spent decades waiting for this exact moment. Sarah Petrov entered last, and the young communications officer looked nervous, because she had only transferred to Jericho 3 months ago, and probably wondered why she rated inclusion in a senior staff meeting. "Show them," Isla said to Webb without preamble, because there was no gentle way to break the kind of news that could reshape everything humanity thought it knew about its past. Webb activated the central display, and the Persephone's beacon filled the room with its repeating message in a dozen different languages, telling them that someone or something wanted humanity to return home. Kato's expression darkened immediately, and his massive hands clenched into fists on the table's surface. "No," he said with absolute finality, "absolutely not. And I don't care what that message says." "We haven't decided anything yet," Isla reminded him, though she understood his reaction completely. "There's nothing to decide," Kato insisted, and his voice carried the weight of conviction. "The Silence Protocol exists for a reason, Commander, and that reason is the survival of every human being in the Terran sphere." "But what if they're telling the truth?" Zara said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her. "What if Earth is safe now? Safe from what?" Kato demanded. "Don't even know what happened there, and that's exactly why we don't go looking." Webb cleared his throat and brought up a new set of files on the display. "I've been studying Earth's final transmission for 20 years, he said, "and I think we made a mistake when we decided to run." The room fell silent, because questioning the Silence Protocol was close to heresy in the careful culture of survival that humanity had built among the stars. "Show us what you have," Isla said, and ignored the warning look Kato shot in her direction. Webb pulled up recovered fragments of data from the hours before. Earth's final message in the display filled with news reports and emergency broadcasts, and desperate transmissions between government facilities that no longer existed. First contact, Webb said simply, Earth encountered an alien species approximately 60 years ago, and the initial reports were confused but consistent. The fragments painted a picture of humanity's homeworld in chaos as something vast appeared in Earth's orbit, and governments scrambled to respond while billions of people watched, their skies filled with ships that operated on principles human science couldn't explain. The final transmission came from Geneva, Webb continued, from the emergency on headquarters, and it was broadcast on every frequency humanity had ever used. Isla had heard recordings of that transmission before, but Webb played it again. In the room filled with a voice that trembled with fear, and something else that might have been sorrow, do not respond. The voice said over the background noise of alarms and shouting, do not call, and then after a pause that lasted 3 heartbeats, forget us. The transmission ended with a sound like tearing metal, and then silence that had lasted for 60 years. We assumed Earth was destroyed or conquered, Webb said. But look at what the message doesn't say. He highlighted specific portions of the audio analysis showing stress patterns in the speaker's voice. There's no mention of attack. Webb pointed out no calls for help and no indication of violence, and the instruction to forget suggests they were trying to protect us from something, but not necessarily from destruction. That's speculation, Kato said flatly. And speculation doesn't override 6 decades of successful survival. The Persephone went back, Zara said suddenly, and her voice carried a strange intensity. My great-grandmother was on that ship. The room fell silent again, and Isla saw. Webb's expression shifted to something like sympathy. I didn't know, Webb said gently. Nobody did, Zara replied, because my family doesn't talk about it, and most of the Persephone's passenger manifest was lost when the ship disappeared. She stood and walked to the display with her hands trembling slightly. My great-grandmother, Anna Petrov, was a botanist, traveling with her husband and 2 children to the new colony, Zara said. And when the ship vanished, my grandmother spent her entire life wondering what happened to her mother. I'm sorry, Lay said, and meant it because everyone in the Terran sphere carried losses from those chaotic early years. Don't be sorry, Zara said, and turned to face them. Help me understand what this means, because if that ship made it to Earth, then my great-grandmother might have seen what we've been running from for 2 generations. Webb pulled up a new analysis of the beacon's data structure. More, he said, the beacon contains layered information, and I've only begun to decrypt the deeper levels, but there are references to Sol system coordinates and mentions of surface observations. Surface observations, Isla repeated. They landed on Earth, it appears, so Webb confirmed, and they survived long enough to send this beacon with its message about safety. Kato stood abruptly, and his chair scraped against the deck plating with a harsh sound. This is insanity, he said. You're talking about throwing away the one rule that has kept 400 million people alive? And for what? For answers, Webb said simply. For closure, Zara added quietly. For curiosity that could kill us all, Kato countered. And I won't be part of it, Isla raised her hand for silence, and the room quieted immediately. We vote, she said. Senior staff decision on whether to investigate further. And that means attempting to decode the rest of the beacon's data and possibly preparing a response transmission. Can't be serious, Kato said. I'm completely serious, Isla replied. Because like it or not, this beacon exists, and pretending it doesn't won't make it go away. They voted in the way the Terran sphere had always made its most difficult decisions with, each person speaking their choice aloud and owning the consequences. Webb voted yes without hesitations. Air voted yes with tears in her eyes. Keto voted no with fury in his voice. The junior medical officer who Isla had called in voted no out of caution, and Isla sat in her chair and felt the weight of command pressing down on her shoulders like the gravity of a planet she had never visited. She thought about Earth and the silence, protocol, and the careful balance of survival that humanity had maintained. Thought about the 400 million people whose lives might depend on her decision. She thought about the message repeating endlessly in a dozen languages, calling humanity home. No, Isla said. Finally, we maintained the silence protocol. The vote was 3-2 against investigation, and Webb looked like someone had struck him, while Zara stared at the table with her hands clenched in her lap. But Isla continued, we don't delete the beacon, and we don't pretend this didn't happen, and if anyone here chooses to continue research on their own time, I won't stop them. It was a compromise that satisfied nobody, but Isla had learned long ago that command meant making decisions that left everyone equally unhappy. The meeting ended, and the staff dispersed to their duties, leaving Isla alone in the command center, staring at the frozen image of Earth's final transmission somewhere. In the darkness between stars, a ghost ship carried answers that humanity had decided it didn't want to. No, but Isla suspected that decision wouldn't hold forever, because the beacon is out there broadcasting its impossible invitation. And sooner or later, someone would be brave enough, or foolish enough, to answer. 3 weeks after the vote, Waystation Jericho found itself at the center of a controversy that spread across the Terran sphere like fire in an oxygen-rich environment. Someone had leaked news of the Persephone's beacon, and now every colony and station and ship with a long-range transmitter was debating the question that humanity tried to bury for 60 years. Should they break the silence protocol and reach out to Earthila sat in her quarters, reading angry messages from colony administrators, who demanded Jericho destroy the beacon and forget it ever existed. Messages came from scientists and historians, who begged for access to the data because they believed humanity deserved to know what happened to their homeworld, the Terran sphere was fracturing along lines of fear and curiosity, with no middle ground between those who valued survival above all else and those who believed ignorance was its own kind of death. Isla deleted another threatening message from a colony that promised to cut all trade with Jericho unless the station recommitted to absolute silence. Her door chimed, and she granted entry to find Zara standing in the corridor looking exhausted and holding a data chip in her trembling hand. "I found something," Zara said without preamble, "and you need to see it, Commander." They went to Isla's private terminal, and Zara inserted the chip with hands that shook from either exhaustion or excitement, or perhaps both. "I've been working on the beacon's encrypted layer," Zara explained, as files began loading, "and there's video data buried in the transmission." The screen filled with grainy footage that showed the interior of a ship's observation deck, and Zara recognized the design as matching the Persephone's. Documented Lealte woman appeared in the frame, and her face bore the distinctive features that Lealte could see echoed in Zara's own appearance 3 generations later. "That's her," Zara whispered. "That's Anna Petrov, and this is her final log." The woman in the video looked tired but determined as she spoke to the camera. "We made it to Earth," Anna said in accented English. "And what we found here changes everything we thought we knew." The video cut to external footage showing Earth from orbit, and Isla felt her breath catch because the planet looked exactly as it did in every historical image she had ever seen. Blue oceans and white clouds and green-brown continents untouched by war or destruction. "The cities are intact," Anna's voice continued over the orbital imagery. "We've scanned every major population center and found no damage and no signs of bombardment or any kind of attack." The footage switched to ground-level recordings, showing empty streets and cities Isla recognized. From history lessons, New York stood silent with its towers reaching toward empty skies. Beijing's streets lay vacant but undamaged. Mumbai's markets sat abandoned but intact, as if everyone had simply walked away mid-transaction. "We landed at 3 sites," Anna explained, "and found the same thing everywhere, which is nothing. And by nothing, I mean no people, and no bodies, and no signs of struggle." The video showed the Persephone's crew walking through empty buildings where personal belongings still sat on desks and meals remained half-eaten on tables. "It's like everyone just disappeared," Anna said, and her voice carried a mixture of wonder and unease. "But they left something for us in Geneva." The footage cut to the interior of a massive chamber that Isla recognized as the old UN General Assembly hall. Empty chairs sat in perfect rows facing a podium where someone had placed a simple sign written in a dozen languages on it. Camera zoomed in on the text, and Isla read words that made her understanding of history crack and reform into new patterns. "We ascended." The sign read, "The threat was us, and you are safe now." Zara paused the video, and Isla sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she had just seen. "Ascended to what?" Isla asked. "Finally, that's the question," Zara replied, "but there's more, Commander, and you need to hear the rest." She resumed the video, and Anna's face filled the screen again. "We don't know what ascension means," Anna said, "but we found automated systems still running and power grids functioning as if maintaining the infrastructure for people who might return." Anna paused and looked directly into the camera with an expression that transcended time and spoke to her descendants. "Across 60 years, we're sending this beacon with all our data," she said, "and we're including a message because whoever finds this needs to know that Earth isn't lost, and it isn't conquered." Anna's eyes glistened with tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "Earth shows something we can't understand yet," she continued, "but they chose it freely, and their final act was protecting us, which means the silence protocol was born from love, not fear." The video ended abruptly and Isla sat staring at the blank screen, while her mind raced through implications that spread like ripples in water. "There's something else," Zara said quietly. "We received a tight beam transmission 2 hours ago from the Kuiper Belt." She pulled up a new file, and Isla read a message from a station that officially didn't exist. The transmission identified itself as Kuiper Observatory and claimed to have been monitoring Earth for 60 years in secret. They confirm everything Anna found. Zara said Earth is empty, but not dead, and there's something on the moon. Isla felt her pulse quicken because the moon meant Luna, and Luna meant humanity's first stepping stone to the stars. "What kind of something?" she asked a signal. Zara replied, "Too complex to be natural and too regular to be random, and it's been transmitting since Earth went silent." The pieces fell into place in Isla's mind, forming a picture that was both terrifying and magnificent, or hadn't fallen to alien invasion or succumbed to some cosmic disaster. Humanity's homeworld had encountered something that offered a choice, and billions of people had chosen to leave their physical forms behind for reasons the Terran sphere couldn't yet comprehend. The silence protocol had protected the colonies, not from aliens, but from having to make that same choice before they were ready. "Webb knows," Isla said with certainty. "He's known for years." Zara confirmed, or at least suspected, "and he's been preparing a response transmission." Isla found Webb in the communications bay, standing before a console where a simple message waited in the queue. "Humanity survives." The message read, "Are you still there?" Webb looked up as Isla entered, and his expression held no guilt or apology. "I had to know," he said simply. "And so, do you, Commander, even if you voted against it?" Isla moved to stand beside him and stared at the queued transmission that could change everything. "If I send this," Webb said, "we'll have our answer in 8 hours, and the Terran sphere will never be the same. And if you don't send it," Isla replied, "we'll spend another 60 years wondering what we were too afraid to learn." They stood in silence while the station hummed around them, and Isla thought about command and responsibility, and the weight of decisions that affected millions of lives. Zara entered the bay and moved to stand on Webb's other side, forming a line of 3 people facing the console that held humanity's question to its past. "The colonies are threatening military action," Isla said. "If we break the silence protocol, they might destroy this station to prevent the contamination of their careful survival." "I know," Webb said. "We could all die for this," Isla continued. "I know," Webb repeated. Zara reached out and her hand hovered over the transmission key. "My great-grandmother went back to find the truth," she said, and she asked her descendants to be brave enough to hear it. Isla thought about the 400 million people in the Terran sphere who had built lives among the stars based on the belief that Earth was lost. Thought about the children born on distant worlds who had never known a home world. She thought about the sign in Geneva's empty assembly hall saying that humanity had ascended, and the threat was themselves. "Press it," Isla said quietly. Zara's hand trembled as it descended toward the key commander. Webb said urgently, "You need to understand what this means." "I understand perfectly," Isla replied. "We've been governed by fear for 60 years, and fear is useful for survival, but terrible for living." Zara's finger touched the transmission. The console beeped once to confirm the message was sending, and then the quantum-entangled communications array fired the prepared transmission towards Sol system at the speed of light. For hours for the message to reach Earth, for hours for any response to returnate. Hours until humanity learned whether its homeworld would answer. Zara stepped back from the console, and Isla saw tears streaming down the young officer's face. "What have we done?" Zara whispered. "We asked a question," Isla said, "and now we wait for the answer." The communications bay fell silent except for the steady pulse of the station's systems. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, a simple message raced toward Earth, carrying humanity's hope and fear in equal measure. On Waystation Jericho, 3 people stood before a console and wondered if they had just saved their species or doomed it too. Whatever fate had claimed their ancestors, the button had been pressed. There was no taking it back now. They could only wait and see if anyone or anything would answer humanity's call home. The first hour after transmission felt like falling into a gravity well with no way to arrest. The Descentilla stood in the command center, watching her displays fill with incoming messages from across the Terran sphere as stations and colonies detected Jericho's breach of the silence protocol. The responses ranged from supportive to furious, with most landing somewhere in the territory of Absolute Terror 3. Major colonies declared Jericho Station rogue and threatened to dispatch military vessels to either seize control of the facility or destroy it outright to prevent whatever contamination might result from breaking 60 years of carefully maintained silence. Cato burst into the command center with his face twisted in rage and betrayal. "You overrode the vote," he shouted at Isla. "You let them send that transmission, and now we're all going to die for it." "I made a command decision," Isla replied calmly, though her heart hammered in her chest, "and I'll take full responsibility for the consequences. Responsibility won't matter when a battlecruiser reduces this station to expanding gas," Cato shot back. "And it won't matter to the 400 million people you just put at risk." Isla didn't have an answer for that because Cato was right about the risk, even if he was wrong about the necessity. Entered the command center carrying his ever-present data tablet and looking remarkably calm for someone who had just helped commit what many considered an act of civilizational treason. The new Columbia Defense Fleet just launched, Webb reported. "ETA to our position is approximately 6 hours. Before we get our answer from Earth." Isla noted, "Assuming Earth answers at all," Cato said bitterly. "We might die for nothing." Zara sat at her communications console monitoring every frequency humanity used, and her face had gone pale with the weight of what they had done. "Commander," she said quietly, "I'm receiving a message from the Kuiper Observatory. The station's hidden." Watchers transmitted again, and their message filled the command center's main display. "We see you," the transmission read. "We've waited so long for someone to be brave, and whatever happens, thank you because you've given us hope that fear doesn't have to rule forever." The message included identification codes proving the Kuiper Observatory was crewed by descendants of scientists who had stayed behind when Earth went silent. They had lived in isolation for 2 generations, monitoring their home world from the cold darkness beyond Neptune and keeping watch over mysteries they couldn't solve alone. "There are more of them," Webb said with wonder in his voice. "Hidden stations throughout Sol System, and they've all been watching Earth." Isla felt something shift in her understanding, because if people had been monitoring Earth for 60 years and survived, then perhaps the threat wasn't as absolute as the Terran sphere. Believe the second hour brought more military mobilizations, and several colonies began evacuating their populations to deep space shelters built during the paranoid years after Earth's silence. The Terran sphere was tearing itself apart over the question of whether Jericho had doomed them or freed them. Milla ordered Cato to begin emergency preparations for either evacuation or siege, and the engineer complied with cold efficiency. Because whatever his feelings about their decision, he wouldn't let the crew die without fighting. Webb compiled everything humanity knew about Earth's final days and transmitted it to every station willing to receive data from Jericho. "If we're going to break the silence protocol," he reasoned, "we might as well break it completely and give people the information they need to make informed decisions." The third hour saw the first defections as 2 nearby stations declared their support for Jericho and began their own preparations to receive whatever answer Earth might send. The fractures in the Terran sphere widened as humanity split between those who clung to survival through silence and those who believed the time had come to face their past. Dela recorded a message for the history logs, explaining her reasoning and accepting full responsibility for the breach of protocol. "We built our civilization on fear," she said to the camera, "and fear kept us alive, but it also kept us small and isolated and afraid to ask the questions that matter most." She paused and chose her next words carefully. "I don't know if Earth will answer," she continued, "and I don't know what that answer will mean for humanity's future, but I believe we deserve to know the truth about where we came from and what happened to our homeworld." Isla ended the recording and transmitted it across the Terran sphere, knowing it might be read as either a defense or a confession, depending on what happened in the next 5 hours. The fourth hour brought unexpected solidarity as stations began forming alliances based on their positions. Regarding the silence protocol, a new network emerged, calling itself the Truth Coalition, and it included scientists and historians and explorers who had spent decades wondering about Earth. They transmitted messages of support to Jericho and began pooling their resources to defend against military action from the more conservative colonies. The Terran sphere is dividing not with violence yet, but with the clear lines of ideological separation that often preceded conflict, the fifth hour saw. The crew of Jericho, gathering in small groups throughout the station to wait and wonder and prepare for whatever came. Nextila walked the corridors and spoke with people who looked at her with expressions ranging from admiration to horrorsome. Thanked her for having the courage to ask the question they had all wondered about in secret. Others cursed her for throwing away the safety that the silence protocol had provided. Isla accepted both praise and condemnation with equal grace because she understood that command meant bearing the weight of choices that affected everyone. The sixth hour brought news that made Isla's blood run cold long range. Sensors detected movement in Sol System, and the Kuiper Observatory confirmed what Jericho's instruments were showing. Something massive was emerging from behind Earth's moon. The hidden structure that had waited in silence for 60 years was activating in its energy signature. Blazed across every sensor array pointed toward humanity's. Homeworld Webb stared at the readings with his face gone white. "It's enormous," he whispered easily, "the size of a small moon, and it's been there the entire time." "What is it?" Isla demanded. "I don't know," Webb admitted, "but it's clearly artificial. And clearly not human." The Kuiper Observatory transmitted one final message before their sensors overloaded from the energy readings. "Oh my God," the transmission read, "it's activating." Then their communications went dark, and Jericho was left staring at readings that showed power levels beyond anything human technology could produce. The seventh hour descended into chaos as the Truth Coalition and the conservative colonies both mobilized their fleets. Everyone wanted to be in position to respond. When Earth either answered or whatever was activating behind the moon made its intentions clear, Isla sat in her command chair and watched military vessels accelerate toward Jericho from multiple directions. The new Columbia Defense Fleet would arrive, first followed by ships from colonies that wanted to either protect or destroy the station that had broken humanity's most sacred protocol. "Two fleets are going to meet at our position," Cato said grimly, "and we're going to be in the crossfire. When they disagree about what to do with us, then we'd better hope Earth answers before they arrive," Isla replied. Zara monitored her communications array with the intensity of someone watching for a signal that could save or doom them all. 1 hour until the 8-hour mark, she said quietly. 1 hour until we know if anyone is listening. The crew fell silent because there was nothing left to say and nothing left to do except wait for the final hour to pass. Somewhere in the darkness, between stars, their message was arriving at Earth. Somewhere behind the moon, a structure older than human spaceflight was waking from 6 decades of dormancies. Somewhere in the Terran sphere, fleets were converging on way station. Jericho ready to fight over the answer to a question that humanity had been too afraid to ask, as Skyla stood at the observation window and stared toward Earth. Though she couldn't see it across the vast distances that separated them, "Humanity survives," she whispered, repeating the message they had sent. "Are you still there?" The 8th hour began to tick away, and every person on Jericho held their breath. Communications array hummed with power as Zara kept it focused on the frequencies most likely to carry a response. Military vessels accelerated toward firing positions around the station, the structure behind Earth's moon blazed with energy that human science couldn't explain, and way station Jericho waited in the darkness for an answer that would either validate their courage or confirm their doom. The seconds counted down toward the moment when lightspeed lag would allow any response to reach them. 10 minutes remaining, 5 minutes remaining, 1 minute remaining. Zara's hands trembled over her console as she watched for any sign of incoming transmission. The command center fell absolutely silent. 30 seconds, 20 seconds, seconds. Isla closed her eyes and thought about Earth and humanity, and the price of asking questions that everyone else was too afraid. 2, voice 5, seconds 3, seconds 1, seconds. Zara's console erupted with activity, and her voice cracked as she spoke. "Commander," she said, "we have a response, and everything humanity thought it knew about its past began to change." The response from Earth didn't come as audio or text or even standard video transmission. Instead, Jericho's holographic systems activated without anyone touching the controls, and the command center filled with light that resolved into images more real than reality itself, Fila felt the sensation of standing on solid ground, though she knew her feet remained on the station's deck plating. The holographic environment expanded to encompass not just the command center, but the entire station, and every crew member found themselves experiencing the same impossible vision. They stood in Geneva, in the old UN General Assembly Hall, and the chamber was filled with people who looked as solid and real as anyone Isla had ever seen. But these people flickered slightly at the edges as if they existed between states of being. Woman stepped forward from the crowd, and her face bore the features of every human ethnic group blended into something that transcended individual heritage. "Hello, a woman said, and her voice resonated not just in the air, but somehow directly in Isla's mind. "We are the archivists, and we have been waiting for you to call." The holographic environment shifted, and suddenly Isla experienced Earth's final days from multiple perspectives simultaneously. She stood in Geneva as government officials received first reports of massive structures appearing in Earth's orbit. She floated in space, watching ships larger than continents take position around humanity's homeworld. She sat in emergency sessions where scientists and philosophers debated the meaning of peaceful first contact with beings so far beyond human understanding that communication itself required new frameworks we did not come to conquer. The archivist explained as the visions continued, "We came to offer a choice that we have offered to thousands of species across millions of years." The holographic environment showed Earth's population receiving the message that would change everything. Archivists were post-biological entities who had transcended physical form countless ages ago. I traveled the galaxy finding species on the edge of technological maturity and offered them the same choice they had once accepted for themselves: ascension to a higher form of existence, where consciousness could expand beyond the limitations of flesh and time, more remaining biological, with all the beauty and tragedy that physical existence entailed. "Your ancestors were divided," the archivist said, and Ela saw the debates that raged across Earth in those final days. Some people embraced the idea of transcendence and saw it as humanity's natural evolution beyond the constraints of mortal bodies. Others rejected it as a loss of everything that made humans human, and chose to remain physical, even knowing that biological life inevitably ended in entropy. The choice created fear. The archivist continued, because those who wished to ascend worried about leaving their children behind, and those who wished to remain worried about losing everyone they loved. Ela watched as Earth's population wrestled with the most profound decision any species could face. At the end, billions chose ascension, and billions more were paralyzed by uncertainty. "We made the decision easier," the archivist explained, "by offering to take those who wished to ascend immediately, while giving time to those who remained uncertain." The holographic environment showed the moment of transformation as billions of human beings stepped out of their physical forms and into something that Isa's mind struggled to comprehend. They became patterns of consciousness woven into the fabric of reality itself. They became thoughts without bodies and ideas without end. They became something that was still human, but also infinitely more. The final transmission was sent by those who chose to ascend. The archivist said, because they wanted to protect the colonies from having to make this choice before they were ready. Isla saw the truth behind Earth's warning. People who ascended knew that news of their transformation would terrify the scattered colonies, who were still struggling to survive in hostile environments. They sent the warning not to hide an invasion, but to give humanity's children time to grow strong enough to choose their own path without Earth's shadow. "The threat was us," Estella whispered, repeating the words from the sign in Geneva, "not because you were dangerous, but because our fear of losing. You would have forced us to make decisions we weren't ready for," as the archivist confirmed, "and so Earth chose to go silent and let the Terran sphere develop its own identity." The holographic environment shifted again, and Isla saw 60 years of Earth in accelerated time. The planet remained intact, with automated systems maintaining infrastructure in case anyone ever wanted to return. The archivists waited behind the moon in the structure they called a gateway, keeping watch over humanity's birthplace. Sand in the Kuiper Belt and scattered throughout Sol System, small groups of humans stayed behind to monitor and remember. "We have watched your colonies grow," the archivist said, "and we have seen you become something Earth never could." The vision showed the Terran sphere and all its diversity, colonies adapted to ice worlds and desert moon stations. built in asteroid fields and gas giant atmospheres, humans who had never seen Earth but carried its legacy in there. DNA and culture, you prove that humanity can survive without its homeworld, the archivist said, and that is a strength Earth never tested. Isla felt tears streaming down her face, because she understood what the archivists were showing them the silence protocol had been born from love, not fear. Earth had given its children the gift of independence by removing the safety net of return. And now the archivist continued, we offer you the same choice we offered your ancestors. The holographic environment expanded to show the gateway behind Earth's moon in all its impossible magnificence. Some of you may choose ascension and join the billions who came before, the archivist explained. Some may choose to remain biological and continue exploring the physical universe, or you may walk a path between both options and create something new that combines the best of flesh and transcendence. Isla looked at Webb and Zara and Kato and saw the same wonder and terror reflected in their faces. But this time, the archivist said, the choice is yours to make with full knowledge and without fear. The holographic environment began to fade, and Isla felt herself returning to the physical reality of Jericho's command center. We will keep the gateway open, the archivist said as the vision dissolved, and we will wait as long as necessary for each of you to decide. The last thing Isla saw before the holographic system shut down was the woman who had spoken for the archivist. She smiled with an expression that combined human warmth with something vast and ancient. Your ancestors chose to protect you by leaving, she said, and now you have chosen to find them by asking. In both choices took courage that honors what humanity has always been. Then the way vision ended, and Isla stood in the command center surrounded by her crew, who looked as shaken as she felt. Communications array crackled, and Zara's console showed incoming transmissions from across the Terran sphere. Every station and colony that had detected Jericho's transmission had also received the archivist's response, because the vision had been broadcast on every frequency. Humanity used the silence protocol was broken, not just for Jericho, but for everyone, Commander Zara said. With her voice trembling, I'm receiving messages from the approaching fleets, and they're standing down. The military vessels that had been racing toward Jericho to either protect or destroy it were now slowing and requesting permission to hold position while their crews processed what they had just experienced. Dyla activated the station-wide communications and spoke to everyone in the Terran sphere who might be listening. We have our answer, she said simply, and now we have a choice to make. Over the following days and weeks, the debate that had nearly torn humanity apart transformed into something more profound. Some people chose ascension immediately and traveled to Earth to step through the gateway into transcendence. Others committed to remaining biological and continuing the adventure of physical existence among the stars. Many chose to wait and consider and explore the implications of a decision that would define humanity's future. The Terran sphere didn't unite around a single choice because unity had never been humanity's strength. Instead, they embraced their diversity and recognized that having the freedom to choose different paths was more valuable than enforcing a single act. 6 months after the transmission, Isla stood in the observation deck of what had been renamed First Contact Station. Jericho's role had evolved from way station to memorial to gateway as people came from across the Terran sphere to process what had happened. Webb had transferred to the Kuiper Observatory, where he could study the gateway up close and maintain communications with the archivist. Zara remained on the station, coordinating between those who chose ascension and those who remained biological. Kato had eventually admitted that breaking the silence protocol might have been necessary, though he still insisted the risk had been enormous. Isla recorded a final log entry summarizing everything that had happened since Zara pressed the transmission button. We were taught that silence meant survival, she said to the camera, and for 60 years that was true because we needed time to grow strong enough to face this choice. She paused and looked out at the stars that humans had spread among. But we learned that courage means choice, she continued, and that the freedom to choose differently is what makes us human, regardless of whether we're biological or transcendent.